Welcome to episode number 10 of Data with Peachey. This is season 1, episode 10. I'm not entirely sure if I'm going to make this the season finale. I'll probably decide quite literally during the recording of this. Who knows? This could be the end of season 1, mostly because I have some basement work coming up soon. So this studio is going to go through a bit of a renovation in August. So if you're listening to this sometime in late August, the reason why I'm probably not in studio is because I'm doing a studio renovation. So more to come. It's supposed to be like 5-6 weeks long. So who knows what it's actually going to look like. But anyway, so far in season 1, we've talked about a lot of AI, metadata, data quality, stewardship, owners, partridge in a pear tree, a little bit of governance. We talked about a lot of different things, but there is one particular component that we haven't really talked a lot about. And that thing I need to touch on is data retention and archival. Now I can already hear the groans and moans in the comments. Actually, I don't get any comments. There's no moans or groans. I can hear it right now that people are going, oh, how is he possibly going to make this exciting? It's about retaining data, the legal requirement, or over-retaining data, and everybody does it. Well, you're kind of right. Every one of us has a data hoarding problem. Now, I myself am scared to death to become like a hoarder of physical stuff inside my home, but I can tell you beyond a shadow of a doubt that I am an extreme data hoarder. I've got years worth of emails. I'm not even sure I've ever deleted a Gmail ever. I think I've just archived it all. Files, pictures, memes, cat videos, you name it. We probably have it somewhere stored on either a server that's out in the cloud or, like me, a NAS drive that's inside my studio. I have years worth of data, pictures, everything hoarded on this NAS drive. Of course, my stuff doesn't necessarily meet a legal requirement, but businesses have some sort of legal requirement, which means that, you got a lot more potential headaches if you don't do data retention right. So we're going to talk about retention and archival, but let's first set the foundation of what in the world do I mean when I say retention and archival. Retention schedule, refers to a policy, procedures of how long you should keep your company's data. Typically it's written at a minimum, meaning you have to keep this and that for at least 5 years. The at least is kind of the floor, the minimum that you have to keep it. Now, there are some regulatory requirements out there that set what the maximum should be, but for the most part, up until today, we've seen a lot more about what the minimums are. You got to keep a credit score this long. You got to keep a driver's license this long. You got to keep a person's first and last name and all the transactions that they do this long, right? Data archival is talking about data that's no longer, used for maybe operational reporting right now, so they move it to more of a cold storage, meaning it doesn't need to be in the active environment, but I still need access to it at some given point. So it's important to talk about archival means the data is still living. When we talk about retention, how long I have to maintain it at a minimum, the floor, and how long I should be maintaining it from a maximum perspective, or quote unquote, the ceiling, so to speak. So now that we know what the two are, let's talk about the kind of the important pieces as it relates to, why is data retention important? So retention and archival is important. First tip I'm going to give you is you got to know what your regulations are. It's a big one, right? Depending on the industry that you're in, different industries have different rules for how long you got to keep things. What might be in healthcare is not the same in finance, is not the same in technology. Healthcare providers have to adhere to things like HIPAA regulations, whereas some financial institutions have to listen to the SEC, OCC, or FDIC, insert another acronym that ends in C, I suppose. That's what financial institutions have to do. So you have to understand, what are my regulatory requirements as it relates to how long I have to maintain the data. And then in some instances where we're seeing it globally is what's the maximum I have to keep it? Meaning once I go past this, I could run into potential regulatory problems if my company is subject to those types of data regulations. The next tip that I have is, okay, cool, you've set your policy, you got your schedule. What data do you have, right? So you got to classify and create a retention policy. Classifying your data is thinking of it, I'm going to put it into like for like groupings. Think of it cleaning out your closet, right? Like I have a must keep, a should keep, and probably throw it away. It doesn't fit anymore. That's the same type of thing that you have to do from a business perspective. So you're going to set that retention schedule that says, I've got to keep this type of data 5 years, 7 years, 8 years, 10 years, 20 years, maybe never purge it. I don't know. Depends on the requirement itself. Now, once you have those, you need to go out with the business and create that retention schedule. That's the thing. You got your policy that is your North Star that says we are going to have a retention schedule, and the retention schedule is a little bit more granular, talking about the exact types of data, classified of course, and how long I need to keep that thing. The policy is your rule book. It outlines what must be kept and should be kept. The retention schedule itself is going to give that granular detail that says, okay, first name, last name, social security number, driver's license has to be kept this long and should only be kept this long. That's what the difference between the policy and the retention schedule is. Tip number 3, inventory time. You got your groupings. Now it's time for the dirty work. You got to find your data across the company. You need to figure out what you got, where you got it, and how long you need to keep it. It's not glamorous. It is very dirty work. You got to get your hands in there, but it is arguably the most important piece. By the way, when you do this inventory time, not only is it important from a retention perspective and a classification perspective, then you can start to do cool things around data quality, data minimization, moving and sharing like-for-like data, creating master assets. All of this stuff, by the way, has to come out of the inventory time. So this inventory time tip, while I'm only talking about it in the essence of data retention right now, it is actually much bigger than that and can be a huge foundational piece for all of your data management program. Tip number 4, create the process. You're probably not going to automate data retention right out of the jump, and that's totally fine. You got to start with retaining and purging from the beginning, and probably things like rules, deletion schedules, archival schedules in a more batch or manual way with your technology partners. If you can automate it, that's tip number 5, automate the process. Before, you got to create the process first to then be automated. So set your rules, your deletion schedules, get all of that in there, then work with your technology partners to set what those automated processes are for deletion, for archival, for purging. That is tips 4 and 5. Create your process and then automate your process. So now that I've talked about the important pieces, let's talk about some potential pitfalls or things about data retention you need to be aware of. Pitfall number 1, over-retaining data. Hey, I can tell you right now, there's going to be some businesses that think, you know what, this is better safe than sorry. I got to keep everything forever. I never know what I might need. Now, not only will this clutter your storage, but it also increases your security risk. So there's a difference. Companies are going to have breaches. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Meaning, if you are retaining data more than you need to, you're putting your company at risk for retaining data that you no longer need to have. And then you're subject to things like breach notifications, depending on the type of data itself. So forget it, better safe than sorry, I'm sure I can use that data sometime in the future. That's not going to work with data retention. So over-retaining data is a potential pitfall in and of itself. Another one is inconsistent policies. You really should be looking at the retention schedule and the retention policy at a global level, the enterprise level within your company, because you can have different retention schedules and different retention policies, quite frankly, and it can lead to confusion, understanding who's on first for what for data management. So don't have inconsistent policies. Try to get that at the highest level, the enterprise level, to make sure everybody's on the same page and they know that they're playing by the same rules. Pitfall number 3, the set it and forget it. This is not a once and done deal. It is something that has to be regularly reviewed and updated because laws are constantly changing as it relates to data retention, data archival, purging, keeping, storing, you name it. You got to make sure that you're constantly caring and feeding for your data retention schedule and your data retention policy. And same with your archival policy. And you got to make sure that you just can't be like, and I'm done. It's not a project, it's a program, which means it does not necessarily have a defined end date. It's just something, again, you have to care and feed for constantly. And pitfall number 4, which is related to the over-retaining pitfall number 1, is the we'll deal with it later approach. Data retention is like a leaky pipe. It may not seem like a huge deal right now, but it can lead to a huge problem further down the line. You could run into storage cost constraints, computing constraints, the incorrect usage of data because you have data that's just over-retained from here till the end of time. So the we'll deal with it later approach, quite frankly, is what a lot of companies do right now because it's so difficult to actually get their arms around, one, all the data that they do have, and then how do I dig in and do that dirty work as it relates to retention? Like, do I purge it? Do I put it in cold storage? What do I do with it? The we'll deal with it later approach, 9 times out of 10 is what a company does. So like I just said, it's really hard. We'll get to it at some point. Why don't most businesses do data retention? Honestly, it's a perceived simplicity and safety of keeping everything, right? It's just easy to think, I won't delete a thing, and storage is pretty cheap anyway. I might need this data at some point, right? It's like this weird false sense of security. It's just not how the world works. It is not simplistic and it's not safe. You're actually putting yourself at undue risk by just saying, forget it. We'll keep everything. Don't worry about it. That goes into the fear of losing valuable data. It's like, well, I mean, I can't delete that. I might need that someday for some super amazing analytical thing that I'm doing. Or I can't delete that because I might be in legal trouble sometime in the future and this could prove that I'm good. No. That's not how this works. And honestly, that particular mode of thinking is old habits die hard. And implementing anything new with a habit like that that's just so deeply ingrained in business is so incredibly difficult. On top of the fact that data retention is usually not sourced the way that it should, meaning, hey, I'm just going to call it straight out. Probably don't source it with enough resources to pull the work off the way that it should be done. Sometimes it's done off the side of a desk for a lot of companies. That's just kind of unfortunately the lay of the land that we are today. The fear of losing that valuable data on top of the fact that you have a culture that's just not willing to change makes it really difficult for businesses to pull off data retention the right way. So I've talked about why businesses should just do this, right? Like I've talked about how, hey, regulatory this, regulatory that, too much risk, cloud compute in general, storage, blah, 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 blah. But what truly could be an ROI that you could anchor back to if you're talking to your executives about wanting to do a data retention program? Outside of the fact that you could just get out of fines and lawsuits, that's definitely a huge motivator probably for your executive team. There's some hidden costs that you can kind of anchor back to when you're trying to make your case whether or not you want to build a data retention program. So think about some of the hidden costs that you have. The extra data takes up some potential storage space. Well, are you on-prem or off-prem? If you're in the cloud, that definitely does cost. And while it is cheap, it does definitely start to add up. You also have the compute on it. Is that active data? Is that data in archival? If it's active, meaning it's operational, it has a certain SLA it has to live up to, right? So that's potentially some compute cost that you can take away from if that data is not there. One thing I don't think a lot of companies trying to do data retention anchor back to enough is the increased productivity. How much time do your employees waste searching for information in a cluttered, disorganized way? If you have all this stuff laid out, classified the right way, they're actually spending their time using the data in the role they're supposed to be doing. They're not data wranglers or engineers or analysts. They might actually be data scientists and doing the thing that they're paid to do. So there is an increased productivity that you can kind of count towards when you have this information in a nice, clean way. There's obviously the risk reduction as well when you comply with regulations and things like that, but you're also setting yourself up for future success that when the regulations come down that says thou shalt delete personal information by 7, 8, 10 years, whatever the new regulation will say, your company is fully prepared to be compliant with that. So you don't have to have the last minute project to try to get everything underneath the umbrella of this data regulation that's going to go into effect, in 2 to 3 years or whatever it is. That also gives you the competitive advantage so you can start to build and use the data that you have, not only in a way that you're supposed to retain it, but also giving you a leg up in the market to do things like advanced analytics and all this cool scientific stuff, or the buzzword of the day, AI. It gives you the ability to do that. So that should be enough ROI to at least get started, but start small, act fast, and keep going up from there, right? You want to start with, where can I start to engage and put data retention around some of the most critical assets that I have? You're never going to be able to boil the ocean. You got to start somewhere. So start with the most critical assets, build your process out like I talked about in one of the tips above, and start from there. So if you've made it this far into the episode, I have decided that it's still going to continue to be season 1. So congratulations for making it through the continuation of season 1. However, it's going to be a little bit weird. I'm starting again. I mentioned it before, new construction in the studio. It's going to probably be a little touch and go. I may not even be here with the fancy microphone in the next episode, but I will be back, I promise, in some sort of revamped studio, and you'll be one of the first to hear about it. If you're watching this on YouTube, you'll be one of the first to see it. If you're listening to this on your favorite podcasting application, consider giving it a 5-star review because I'm doing the basement and you learned a little bit about data. If you're on YouTube, do all the YouTube things like share, subscribe, thumbs up, leave a comment about what color I should paint the walls of the studio. Or should I continue to rock with the shiplap? I don't know yet. Haven't made that decision. That's probably going to be a game time decision. As always, thanks for watching. This has been Data with Peachey, episode number 10 of, I think it's going to be titled Retain This. So I will catch you on the flip side and see you in another episode.